Hello and welcome to this Year 10 and Year 11 English Literature webinar Of Mice and Men. Now, there are three key learning aims, three key takeaways. First of all, we're going to understand the context and the characters of the novel or novella, Mice and Men, so that we can consider Curley's wife and analyse some key quotations. This is all designed around a specific assignment. Consider to what extent Curley's wife is presented as an outsider. So you are considering if she's an outsider, how much of an outsider she is, if she's an outsider compared to the other characters. I would suggest wholeheartedly that she is an outsider. She's presented as an outsider because of the context and the other characters. And that's what we're going to look at. And by the end of this session, you feel very confident that you'll be able to secure a grade 5 at least, especially if you are working towards a teacher assessed grade. Now, let's think about the background, historical background. John Steinbeck, the writer, wrote this during the Great Depression, which was when the economy had collapsed in America. Unemployment was very high, which meant that many people did not have a job. And if you were illiterate, which meant if you were not highly educated, farming work was the main employment. However, you had to travel from town to town to find this work. If you were lucky, like George and Lenny are in the novel, you would receive a work permit because government agencies would find work, but it was always itinerant, which meant you were traveling from place to place to place. So the heart of this novel is about rootlessness, the fact that people were unstable or destabilized because they had to uproot and travel in order to become employed. And Curley's wife has the same thing. Although she's not working in the same way as the men are, she has uprooted herself. She's become rootless and itinerant. She's traveled away from her home and she's become an outsider. Also, the novel is very much about loyalty and desperation, the two main characters, because this is very much a buddy novel about friendship, are forged together for both loyalty and desperation. Lenny and George have been friends since they were children. George used to bully Lenny, but Lenny idolizes George. Now, he almost killed him. George almost killed Lenny because he was playing a cruel joke about jumping into the river. George couldn't swim. Lenny saved him. Lenny couldn't swim. George saved him. And Lenny was incredibly grateful and forgotten the fact that George almost killed him. Lenny lived with his Aunt Clara and she is now dead. So George has become his best friend, his brother, his parent, his family. That's all he has. But then Lenny is all that George has. So you can see that there are two sides of the same coin. You've got the friendship, the loyalty, however, the fact that they have no one else, the desperation. And it's the same for Curley's wife. She's got the loyalty. She's married to Curley. She has been married for less than a month when we meet her. But the desperation, because like George and Lenny, she has no one else to look after her. We also need to understand this novel in terms of the genre. This is a tragedy and it's full of tragic heroes. But what are tragic heroes? Well, there are people, characters, protagonists who are high-born, well-respected, high-ranking, or they have great potential. You see that in George. He's a very, very smart man, very intelligent. You see that in Lenny. He's huge, he's well-built, he's powerful, he's muscular. You see that with with Curley's wife. She's beautiful, she may be talented, she has great potential. And then these people have a weakness or fatal flaw that leads them to have the wrong decision. For George, we could argue that Lenny is his fatal flaw. Looking after Lenny is the thing that gets him into trouble. You could say for Lenny is his desperation to have affection, to pet, to comfort something. That's his fatal flaw. He makes the wrong decisions again and again. For Curly's wife, you can see it's her ambition. She wants to be famous, she wants to be loved, she wants to have attention, and she rushes into marriage. Unfortunately, the wrong decision means that they suffer. You can see that George suffers, Lenny suffers with the wrong decisions in the novel, and Curly's wife suffers. It brings about her own death. And these characters, they learn too late that they have made the wrong decision and death is upon them. So George learns too late that Lenny has once again done something wrong. Curly's wife learns too late that Lenny essentially is a monster. He's a beast that doesn't know his own strength. And so we have the sense of pity and grief and catharsis for these characters at the end of the novel and the end of their lives. So we're going to talk about the 7 main characters before we zoom into Curly's wife, because I think understanding the other characters, comparing them with Curly's wife, will really help us to understand why she really is an outsider and how Steinbeck presents her as an outsider. We have George, first of all. As we know, he understands Lenny, he appreciates Lenny, he's there for him, he is a friend for him. However, he feels the burden and he's angry, and you can see in his foul language, he swears and verbally abuses his best friend. Also, we see that, like the other men, he goes to brothels at the weekend. So we can see that for Curly's wife, this is not someone that she can trust, not someone that she can lean on, because he's easily angered, he's very impatient, but also he doesn't see women as anything except objects which he can use for his own pleasure and for his own gratification. So you can see that she's an outsider, because someone like George would never be able to understand her or her needs. Lenny, we know that he pets soft things. He's desperate for that kind of attention and affection, even dead mice. He's obsessed with rabbits, and he's very attracted to young women. We know that in one of the towns, he was very attracted to a young woman, her soft dress. He held it so tight that she was scared. She thought she was being assaulted, and he doesn't know his own strength. Again, for Curly's wife, we can see that she's an outsider. The attraction, because he is someone who's desperate for attention and affection. She is someone who's desperate for attention and affection. We can see that they are like-minded, and we can understand the attraction we have between Lenny and Curly's wife. But we can see that this is a fatal attraction. It's something that will end up badly for both of them. She is throwing herself into the arms of someone who is incapable of understanding his own strength. He kills mice, he kills dogs, and he kills a young woman. He doesn't know his own strength. And she's very much this outsider who becomes dependent on the affection of this unfortunate giant. Candy is a swamper. That means he's a cleaner, and he has an old dog. He's known this old dog since a pup, but the dog is deaf and blind and it smells. People find it annoying and frustrating, and they kill the dog. How does this link with Curly's wife? It's a foreshadow of her death. It's a foreshadow very much of Lenny's death, but it's a foreshadow of her death, because life is not valued. Something as precious as a dog that this poor lonely old man has known since it was a pup, perhaps 12, 15 years, that friendship that's so close, they find the dog annoying and irritating, and they can take its life very easily. So we can see the same is true for a young girl, that her life is not valued and she's not seen as precious or unique in any way. Curly, that's her husband. We know that his background is in fighting, it's in boxing. So he's described as being pugnacious and competitive. He's the short son of the boss, and his life is all about status and position, and using his status and position to intimidate other men. He married her as a trophy wife. He's not interested in her needs or looking after her in any way. He's interested in his own needs and using her for his own status, his position, to threaten and intimidate the other men, that he has something that they might want that they cannot have. So you can see again her being exploited in a way by her husband is making her very much an outsider. Slim, he's the jerk-line skinner. He's considered to be the prince of the ranch. He is someone who is trustworthy. Slim listens to George. George confesses about how Lenny touches a girl's velvet dress, how he's accused of assault, how the men of that town ran them out of town. He's actually open, George, for the very first time to someone confiding. However, Slim is seen as a complete threat to Curly. Curly's wife would never be able to talk or confide or share her emotions with someone like Slim, despite the fact that he's one of the only people on the ranch who would have the time and the patience to hear her out. She's very much an outsider without a friend, without anyone to confide in. And then Crooks, he's the stable buck. That means he knows the horses and the mules. He's the only black character in the novella. We can see he's educated, he understands about the law, he's completely isolated, desperate and alone. So you can see how he's like Curly's wife, the only female, the only young really character in the novella, and he's the only black character in the novella. However, he torments Lenny. Soon as Lenny is in his room, he just tries to let Lenny imagine how it would feel not to have a friend, not to have anyone you can rely on. And he kind of torments him so that Lenny understands what it's like, what it feels like to be completely alone. But this is a cycle of abuse and torment that we see, because after he torments Lenny, Curly's wife, who's on her own, Saturday night, her husband has gone into town. We know the other men have gone to brothels, which would suggest he has as well. She's alone, she's desperate, but then she torments Crooks because he asks her to leave. The rejection is too much, and she, like Crooks, uses her power on someone that she can see is beneath her. So Curly's wife, she is an outsider because she is trapped by misogyny. They see women as only one thing. She's trapped by her naivety. She runs away from home and doesn't understand that she's not precious or valued or important or special. We can see the casual violence that's the norm on this ranch and the nature of exploitation that's all around her. She's very much an outsider and she's a victim, and yet she's influenced by all these traits. We can see in the novel that she's very young, perhaps 17. She's pretty, she likes nice clothes, she likes shoes, she likes makeup. So she's naive and she's vulnerable. And she married Curly because she had an argument with her mother. She had dreams about being in the movie. She thought her mother had stolen a letter from a movie director, and she runs away from home. She marries Curly, but she, being the only woman, she's forbidden to talk to Curly, but she defies that. She runs to the other men behind Curly's back. She can see the rebellion there, but the desperation. But she is a Southern belle, which means that in the South, in Texas, where this is set, the women are seen as pure, as untouchable, particularly by black men. And she says, she threatens Crooks and says that she could frame him just by using her words. She could say that he touched or attacked her, and she could frame him and he could be hanged. So we can see that although she's an outsider, that doesn't mean that she's fully a sympathetic character. She's spoilt, she's selfish, she's unkind, she's self-obsessed. She has her head's in the cloud, thinking that she can be a movie star because it doesn't come as easily as just someone writing you a letter. She's deceptive and manipulative, and she's exploitative as well. And yet that doesn't stop her from being an outsider and someone that we can sympathize, although we don't fully sympathize with her. Okay, for the last part of the webinar, we're going to look at some key quotations around Curly's wife. So these are from chapters 2, 4, and 5. In chapter 2, we're introduced to Curly's wife, and we can see that this is a fatal attraction. As she enters the room, it says the rectangle of light in the doorway was cut off. This is almost horrific. Light being cut off is almost a sense of misery or threat or even evil and fear. So her presence is disturbing. We find a sinister mood as she enters the bunkhouse. She's someone who comes with a sense of unease in her presence. Physically, then, we're also introduced to her in chapter 2. It says that she has wide-spaced eyes, which could show that she's someone who is naive and vulnerable, but it could also show that she's looking for entertainment, she's looking for excitement, so she's somehow very shallow. The fact that her fingernails are red and her dress is red and the ostrich feathers in her elaborate sandals are red has this real sense of temptress. She's someone who's trying to be very sensual, very flirtatious. You can see that danger is marked all around her with this red that's kind of in triplicate, 3 different types of red on her person. It says also that she's put her hair in rolled clusters like sausages, and this simile is about her perfection, about how she takes great care in her appearance, but it also is a phallic and a olfactory, perhaps gustatory image. It's something that we can eat and smell almost. It's almost a phallic sexual image with those little sausages. It's almost tempting us because of her appearance. And again, I mentioned the elaborate ostrich feathers. I mean, she's working on a dirty ranch with horses and mules, manure, smelly dogs, and all sorts of things. And yet she has these elaborate sandals, which shows again that she's bold, she's not practical, and she's desperate for attention. And when she speaks, then her voice has a nasal, brittle quality, perhaps showing that she's short-tempered, but also perhaps showing weak and fragile. Something brittle is very easily broken. So in chapter 2, we have the sense of her presence, we have her physical appearance and the quality of her voice that really is warning us. It's showing us something devilish about her, something that's alluring, but it's a fatal attraction. That means it will lead to a tragic ending, and it's warning us of that reversal of fortune in this tragedy that's linked very much with Curley's wife. In chapter 4, it's 4 lonely people. So we have Crooks, and it's all in his little stable room. He's not allowed in the bunkhouse with the other men because he's black. So he has to have a room with the horses. It must smell atrocious. However, at least he has privacy. He has space. He doesn't have to clean his things out. He can leave them lying around. This has at least a sense of permanence. Now he is in his room. Lenny joins him. Candy comes because he's talking about their dream ranch, and then Curley's wife also joins them. So it could have been a nice party of 4, but because she's been forbidden to talk to the men and they fear talking to her because of any repercussions this might have with Curley, he might beat them up or sack them because he's the boss's wife, the boss's son, and he's short-tempered. He doesn't want anyone talking to his wife, so they're scared of her, and she's a threat like she was in chapter 2. However, when Crooks stands up for himself against her and says, please leave my room, she says, I could get you strung up on a tree so easy, it ain't even funny. She's using her status as a white woman to demean him and threaten him that she could have him hung. That means killed because of an accusation. It says that Crooks had reduced himself to nothing. There was no personality, no ego, nothing to arouse either like or dislike. He said, yes, ma'am, and his voice was toneless. Her effect on him is instant. She belittles him. He retreats into a shell of nothingness, and he presents no threat to her. She has all the power. And for a moment, she stood over him as though waiting for him to move, so that she could whip at him again. But Crooks sat perfectly still, his eyes averted, everything that might be hurt drawn in. She turned at last to the other 2. Can you see the exploitative power? She's standing over him, waiting, almost relishing the fact that she could whip at him, not physically, but with her words, to threaten violence and death on him. She enjoys for that brief moment the violence. So although she is an outsider, Saturday night, and she's in a smelly stable room with these outcasts and misfits, She isn't completely sympathetic because you can see the power that she has over crooks. The last thing we see then is chapter 5, where she is desperately alone. It's the chapter where she meets her death. She says, I get awful lonely. I get lonely. You can talk to people, but I can't talk to nobody but Curly. Here again, we sympathize. She's an outsider. She's desperate because of misogyny and exploitation. The fact that she's not significant. She's a trophy wife. She's an accessory. She doesn't have even a name. She's called Curly's wife. And so we can see her a desperation. Her words tumbled out in a passion of communication. You can see it's been pent in, and all her emotions have been blocked, and she's finally allowed to speak, and she rushes to talk before someone tells her to stop. I could have been in the movies and had nice clothes, all them nice clothes like they wear. You can see that it's shallow, and yet she does have dreams and ambitions. Some people got kind of coarse hair, but mine is soft and fine. Of course, I brush it a lot. That makes it fine. Here, feel right here. This is the moment, the turning point of her fate. This is her vanity and her ambition to be loved and acknowledged as special. She puts her head in the hands of this man who doesn't know his own strength. And the meanness and the plannings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was very pretty, simple, and her face was sweet and young. So in her death, she is re-ennobled. That's why I would say she's a tragic hero character. There was a great potential. She had this awful, fatal flaw of ambition, this desperation to be loved, attention seeking. She made the wrong decision by marrying Curly and letting Lenny touch her. And yet at the end, she realized too late that her life was going to be taken away. And at the end, she's found some kind of peace because she's just very pretty, simple, sweet and young. Okay, I hope that that's helped you to understand that Lenny's wife is, I keep saying Lenny's wife, I don't know why, Curly's wife is an outsider. The whole of the novel is about itinerant workers and rootlessness. She's rootless. The whole of the novel is about loyalty and desperation, two sides of the same coin. She's loyal, kind of, to her husband, but she's desperate. She is a tragic hero because we can see the reversal of fortunes for her. And then at the end, the meanness and the plannings and discontent go. She is faced with misogyny and naivety and violence and exploitation. And I hope you can feel confident about writing about Curly's wife. Thank you for joining me, and see you next time.